Hi everyone, today you and I are going to do some work for Ben. Ben is a contributor to the Blender source code, VFX artist on the recent Sonic films, and one of my best friends, as you may know if you've been around for a little while. We're kind of conceptually working on a collaborative product. It's like a crystal generator of some kind. We're not kind of defining it in really harsh terms of what we want it to be. We're just kind of going to be experimenting because it's like a joint idea, a joint subject of interest. While I was doing some Destiny 2 dungeoning with Azzy, another friend and VFX artist, or technical artist, very generalized skill set, I asked Ben what he visualizes, like what does he want from me? He wanted me to do presentation for the crystal stuff because I have experience with that, such as with the Afterglow lighting demos for Blender. He also said he wanted me to pick out types of minerals and structures that I think would be interesting or would look great in 3D. So why don't we start off with me showing you something a bit personal. Alright, maybe I'll block parts of the screen out, but while I took Ben to the Natural History Museum in London, in South Kensington, they have this really incredible hall of like mineral samples, which are beautiful. They're all different kind of types, categories of minerals, different shapes, different locations where they were sourced from. So I took a few pictures, just out of interest. Here's Ben having a little look. But there were some that I really liked. For example, the oxides here. I quite liked how, just without even any color, just shade, so just black, you can get a great variety of looks and styles. I think these were actually quite interesting, like source references for doing different kinds of geometry nodes type generations and stuff. You see that some of them are very fragmentary and they're mostly empty space, whereas some of them are more like kind of solid manifold structures with just like surface imperfections and details. Some of them you can kind of get a visual for how like the entire substructure of them is being represented by the surface, as here with the different layers. So I think ones like this are actually quite interesting. So Ben, if you're watching, this is quite a useful reference image for variable styles. Things like this as well, even though it's rotated the wrong way, are interesting because just how luminous minerals can be. Things like this which look like an ocean kind of carved into the rock. That's one of the things I found really interesting about looking at all the mineral samples is just the sheer variability in both structure and color. And then there were some really valuable and hyper expensive things kept in a separate vaulted section of the museum. They're basically like the rarest of the rarest things that the museum has. And then we're back to like the regular samples. Now, primarily one of the things Ben wanted me to do, like I said, was presentation. And I've always wanted to do like museum type display cases and things, especially for Afterglow. It's going to be really important for that project in the future, having like display cases with emissive light sources inside of them to help people present things like product visualization demos, or even for scientific visualization in some cases, or like exhibition graphic material, stuff like that. So what we're going to do today is think about that. So two things. I've got this fossil environment that I recently did, where I scanned in one of my historical fossils, used the backside of it to construct a rock wall in 3D. I don't know whether I'll get much use out of this. I could use the fossil as a demo object for exhibition type things, or I could use this as like a backdrop just to make it interesting. And separately, I have an early version of like crystal demos that Ben sent me. He's done more advanced stuff since then, which could be interesting just for like, testing lighting positions and stuff like that. So what I've done is I've made a new save of this environment, and I think the natural thing to do is just copy this straight in. So this is what I sometimes do with projects when I'm doing something new. I don't always start from complete scratch, like a basic empty default blend file. Sometimes I just think narratively, like starting from a pre-existing file kind of makes sense in a way. So like sometimes there are things left over from the file which you can use to kind of inform your direction, kind of gives you a bit of a starting point. Or sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes you do end up putting more effort into clearing it out and starting from scratch again. But I don't know, like crystalline objects are quite difficult ones to light. So what I'm going to do is maybe set it up so maybe there's like some kind of pedestal in the middle of this place, and I will need to modify the camera to like change the field of view just to get it more focused on the subject, and then we'll need to do bespoke lighting for it with the context of some kind of display case. So let's grab the camera that we're a part of. Now I did find when working with the crystal stuff originally that lighting them can be quite difficult, strictly because crystalline shapes are reflecting light in pretty much every direction, and they have like flat faceted surfaces, which makes it a little bit difficult to get them to look good. When you have like flat faceted surfaces, sometimes it's quite easy to see whether something is obviously computer generated. But I did settle on something for this file, which was a offset fill light and from Ben a dappled spotlight. So what I'll say is, let's bring those in as well. to our already complex scene. And then we can reduce things as we discover that they're a bit too much for our needs. So we have a crystalline structure, a contextual background, a fill light, and a dappled spotlight. Let's see how bright this is. Obviously way too bright, and I do have volumetrics enabled as well, which may be a bit too much. So two things, remove the volumetrics, then reduce the lights. That was 5,000 watts, okay. Put that down to 0, let's do like 100. Now is this light good or is it too intrusive? Let me do a comparison, disable, enable, disable. So I'm just going to make some micro adjustments to what I've got. And here you can see an example of what I described where there's such hard things to light that when you light them in a certain way, they are obviously CG. And we can see where we have the obvious like shader generated roughness variabilities on the scratches there. It looks very different to this here where we've got more light kind of punching through the transmission, through the core structures. So the lighting is very scene dependent. Now Ben loves oranges, so let's try and bring back a bit of the orange color anyway. Okay, so bringing a bit of that back. Light off, light on. There's a rotational light point, so I can actually move that circular one around like this, because I had it kind of parented to a point before. So in doing this, we can kind of find a spot of where we want the light to come from in this scene. Maybe I can move the camera around a bit. And I am completely improvising, by the way. So when I'm in a state like this and everything looks very confusing and complicated, what is this random thing in the center? It doesn't make any sense in the scene. I'm visualizing, okay, maybe I will build out a display case underneath it. I will change the lighting. I will have like some glass, which fades it out a bit. The actual base will be a bit darker. You can imagine there's space for someone to walk by. The volumetrics will be active, so it will look better in context in the scene. So when we're placing things in, you have to use your imagination. That's actually part of the process of becoming a professional 3D artist. We'll take a quick diversion to speak about this. When people start off doing 3D artwork, they let frustration get to them. I remember speaking about this a lot back in the day. Frustration is the real killer of creative skill development. And it's something that I bet all of you will be familiar with in some way. When you start trying to learn a new skill, even if it's something like drawing, you're frustrated that it doesn't look as good as you want it to, and that is the ultimate demotivator. As you learn more skills and you learn more techniques, there is something that you have to remember as a creative. When you're in the flow of work, you can't remember in your short-term memory all the experiences you've already had with artwork in the past, in particular the learning process when developing your skills. So of course you're cognitively biased towards an imposter syndrome where you feel like you don't know anything. But if you trust your intuition and you give yourself a space of time to work in, sure, things don't look good in the present, but you trust that they will look good in another few hours maybe, if you just tinkered around a bit more. I just want you to keep that in mind as we're working with something disparate on the screen right now. Two different styles, a bit of random lighting. How do we make these cohesive? Trust in the process. And also, subscribe. Oh, I'm sorry for that one. Well, not really. Okay, let's make some kind of template base object for our display case. Again, if you watch the original video where we made this museum-ish like environment, you'll know that I like to just block things out in the minimum possible way with like planes and or cubes if needed, because you don't need to do any more than a simple primitive when discovering the lighting language for the scene, if you want to think about it that way. We're going to thin this one out on the y-axis and then just move the bottom one down to the base. Fine, and what I'm also going to do is give it a bit of a roof as well. So we're going to scale that down on the z-axis in edit mode so we don't lose the scale. Then we just apply the scale with Control A on both objects. There we go. Modify that one a little bit more and punch that down. So what I'm visualizing here is a pedestal type display case. Now some display cases have glass all the way around from the top as well, and some of them have like solid units at the top. Let's actually look back at an image that Ben and I took at a museum. Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple of images. Here's one at the British Museum. There's a section from China full of really nice pottery, really expertly made. You see we've got a display case here that's got like a pedestal unit down below, side glass, and then a kind of thick section at the top which is containing the lighting. You see that? Again, we've got another one here, pedestals of various shapes, and then a fixed section with the lighting. And there's Ben. This is for a more Korean section, I believe. And then again here, but this one's more variable in the way that we have different display shelves at various heights. Okay, back to my scene. So I'm going to have a display case here. Maybe I'll raise that a little bit. We could have light sources along the top if we wanted. And ideally, we're going to have some glass along the edge. Now, I don't know how light will look projecting downwards through the crystalline structure, but I guess we'll figure it out. And again, I can always throw some volume in at the end just to add a bit of visual intrigue to the scene. And the dappled spotlight that I have may not be required. It may actually be throwing too much light in. But then again, maybe I'll need to remove my big circular light instead, just to darken things out. So let's actually do that. I know I brought these in, but since I am in control, I'm making the executive decision that we won't need them for now. So what this does is it brings the crystals back under the control of our scene. So we have them dark, and this makes me excited to see what it looks like with upper lighting. So let's put the glass in first of all. Let me just rearrange the crystals so they're a bit more compact in that space. Sorry if the rendering view is making it a little bit complicated. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Nice. Okay. I'm also noticing that I believe this cube does not have the right normals, so let me just recalculate those. There we go. How can you tell if the normals are wrong? Well, if the top face is bright in this standard matte cap scene, then you know it's correct. If the top is dark, then you know things are wrong. It may be different for your scene because you may have different like lighting and like studio visualization presets going, but I'm using a matte cap at the moment. There's no right or wrong way to visualize your viewport. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this face in edit mode. I'm going to duplicate it with Shift D, press P to separate it by selection, go back into object mode, then select the new top face that I've separated. I'm going to go back into edit mode, but I'm going to go into face mode, select it, press I to inset very slightly. I only want a very thin border here. Then I'm going to hold Alt and left click to select the outer boundary. And then I'm going to press E to extrude it upwards. Now I'm going to copy the location of this bottom face for the top object here. So I'm going to go into edit mode, make sure it's on global, choose the Z and Control C to copy that. Same thing for this bottom object. I'm going to go back into edit mode, make sure our original border is selected and it's set to global. On the Z position, Control V and paste. So we now effectively have this shell between our pedestal pieces, but there is an unnecessary face we don't need. So I'm in the wireframe mode. I'm just going to select that bottom face and delete it. There we go. So now we have this containing shell. So obviously we need to give it a glass-like material. So I'm going to make a new material. I had my caps active called Exhibit Glass. And I'll go into rendered view so we can see what happens. In the shader editor, I can do this with the principled, or I can do it with like a glass BSDF. If I press Shift A and I can look for glass BSDF, that would be fine. If I plug that in, you'd be able to see it makes it transparent. There is no wrong answer. The visuals are entirely up to your own discretion. What I might suggest though is with this new glass object, whenever you make a glass object, consider going to the object properties and removing the shadow visibility. So what this will do is it will prevent the glass from producing its own shadow on the inside. That's particularly important for if you're doing like interior design. Like if you've got a sun lamp object projecting light into a room in a building, you might think, wait, why is there no shadow being produced in the room? Modify this shadow ray visibility and you'll start to see like shadows from furniture pieces start being generated from the sun and things like that. Okay, so now we have quite a pretty scene and a random exhibit kind of standing in the middle, and it's just waiting for us to light those crystals. How are we going to do it? All right, well, I love giving myself artistic control. I'm imagining like a square-like border, but we could do circular ones instead. What I might do is I might take these objects. I'm actually going to name them. So exhibit base and exhibit top. And I'm going to duplicate them, so we'll have backups of them. And then I'll do a simplified one for now, and then I can do a more complex one as required. So maybe I'll press I to inset, and then inset again, so we get a little border there. And it's a bit hard to see, right, because the overlay for the object doesn't appear until we're inside of like the glass. So it's a bit tricky to keep track of. I'm going to press new, so we've got a basic object for the exhibit, and then I'm going to press the plus button, and then we're going to make a new exhibit. Then this material. In the face mode, I'm going to select that boundary that we've made and press assign for the second material. So now, with that selected in the material, I'm going to go into the emission settings and increase, and we'll see our light square in there. So as we increase this, we're going to see our exhibit starts lighting up. Ain't that good? And that's like the most simplest shape we can do. To be honest, it's not that bad. like already. I thought it would be worse. But this is one of the reasons why I am a prophet of physical diegetic lighting in 3D spaces, like actually using physical emissive light sources rather than the basic lamp objects that you get in the Shift A menu. Because as I've always said, especially in my Blender Holt channel, where I've done some lighting specific workshop material, by the way, if you're interested in learning more about lighting in Blender, especially physical lighting like this, then I recommend checking that out. youtube.com/BlenderHolt. It's my workshop related channel. The reason why I like this type of lighting so much is because if you understand the physical principle of where light should be placed, it will surprise you with good results without needing to do much else. You know, I just figured, well, if I put a square light here, then this should look all right, and it does. Rather than having to like fiddle around with like tons of little lamp objects, it gets really finicky, especially if you change the position of objects. So that's nice. Now, obviously, everything I look at here can be made more detailed. I could make the base of the exhibit more detailed, and I probably will for Ben's benefit, or I can make the top more detailed. I could do the lighting more detailed. Again, we could do circular things, or like a gradation of light or a pattern. I can make it more artistic. I could do like video lighting, on the top. See, we did a video recently about a screen type effect. I can make the glass more complex. I can change the entire scene, but I don't know how much more I want to do in this video. So let's play around a little bit more. I'm clicking on the glass object now. I'm going to plug in the principled, and we're going to see what it's like doing principled glass. So I'm going to go to the transmission and turn that up. This is very much like a frosted glass now. I can turn the alpha down. It's not as apparent that there's glass. The alpha is basically just like a overall transparency value. So it's not really much of a physical calculation on transparency, more as just if you're just sliding a transparency on an image in something like Photoshop. We can modify the index of refraction so you can simulate any type of transparent material that you like that way. In this particular case, I would say that we're probably better off sticking with the glass BSDF because it's simpler to control. From here, we still have index of refraction controls if you know the IOR values of a material you want to simulate, and we have roughness control. So even if we like the frosted effect that the principled can provide, we can still get that with the glass BSDF. So if you're making something like this and you're worried that it's a bit too clean visually in the glass, you can just up the roughness a little bit, and that might give you something a bit more realistic maybe. Depends on what you're going for. That would be quite useful for like aquariums and stuff like that. I just got curious for a minute. I want to see what my amethyst color grading looks like in this. Quite a deep purple there. If I raise the value a bit, maybe it's a little bit better, but we'll stick with orange because Ben likes it. Let's try and make this a bit better. Let's move the camera forward. I'm going to disable the volume in the scene briefly just to give us a bit more performance. Let's have a quick analysis of our little exhibit. I would love to walk around here, by the way. This is exactly how I would design a museum. Sounds really stupid saying that now. I've just said it. Of course it's how I would design a museum. I've literally built the scene. There's a redundant statement. I would have like individual columns like this with like a progression of the chronology of like fossils through time representing life, or minerals formed at different points in geologic history. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. We could gradiate the lighting. Maybe we'll do that here. So we've got our lighting square along the top. Let's take, it's been a little while since I've done this, so I'm going to take a mapping node. I'm going to take a color ramp because I know I'll need it at some point. Let's take a texture coordinate node. Do I need a separate XYZ node as well? Just trying to remember object space because we're kind of doing stuff in relation to the origin. We're going to make a gradient there. All right, what I've done is I've got a texture coordinate node and then a mapping node, and I've adjusted the X location so that once it's passed through the separate XYZ node, if I bring the black right up to the white, I can still see a little bit of the white just there. So that's kind of how I balanced it here. And then if I drag that back, it should open it up entirely. And then from here, we still have the separate strength control. So that's how I've done it, which means we can scrub the black back and forth and see what effect that has. But likewise, it should also allow us to put different color values in, like different positions of the gradient. Not that we would want to, but let's say I make that white, but it means that we can kind of isolate color bands along the way if you wanted to use that for some kind of effect. So you have like white, cyan, pink, and then white again. Might not be appropriate for this use case, but just letting you know that if you have a gradient, you can do that. If I flip the color ramp, then the black will start at the back. And again, adjustments can be made to the nodes any time. I don't think that doing a top gradient is going to help us really with making this lighting look cooler. We can try a lower one. So let's take the base here. Going to select the top cube there. Going to do a similar thing again where I make a ring in that position. So the top object had material. Let's give the bottom one the same one. And again, the second one will be exhibit emiss. Might be a better idea to separate them though, but even still. Let's select that inner ring and assign that, so that should be glowing. But I will make a different version of the material and name it lower, which means we should be able to isolate them, and I'll rename the top one to upper. So for example, I could like reduce the strength of the upper one and still have the lower one, or vice versa. I'll keep the upper one the same, but I'll take the lower one. And with that lower one selected, maybe I'll like scale it inwards a little bit. Does that do anything interesting? I'm not sure. Let's add a bit of color maybe. That's the wrong material. So let's add a bit of orange color in there. Maybe I can turn the strength down a little bit. The light doesn't necessarily need to be like immediately at this level, so I could extrude that down a little bit. I just need to make sure that I select the inner faces here and make sure they're back to the regular material, so the light is only coming from the depressed area. I can then select that area and have it ready to move down while we observe and see what that looks like. So I can make it deeper so it's not immediately present, or raise it a little bit. Maybe if I take the top now, if I flip that again, what if I reduce that lighting presence, select the bottom one again, increase the emission strength. I've decided to just blitz it a little bit. So we've got some relatively strong lower light and a pretty strong upper light. Maybe what happens if I increase the roughness a little bit? That's too strong. To 0.02. Okay. Repositioning the camera a bit, taking the material for the exhibition, maybe making it a bit darker, or rather maybe a bit more metallic. It would be nice to have the lighting a bit less consistent along the top, so maybe I will do some kind of spherical thing quickly, because this recording is really getting on a bit. It's part of the challenge of doing like these improvised sessions. So let's do a cursor up there. Let's do set origin to geometry, cursor to selected. I think I might have actually had a similar object for this already in the scene. Yes, I did actually, from a previous video here. Okay, let's bring that in. It's basically like a circular light object. Now I'm going to rotate you. Oh, Y180, place you somewhere at the top a little bit. Actually, I can do you to the cursor. Separate the material. What happens if I up the lighting on that? So half of it is like a bar and half of it is a circular light, and we can move it up and down. Maybe the circular light is just better than the bars. Let's do a test to see whether we should have just done circular from the beginning. Yes, no, maybe too flat. The material here may need a slight bit of changing as well. Part of the material isn't just Ben. I've also like made my own modifications over time. So I've actually disconnected some of those changes that were made. Let's see what this looks like as a basic object. So no particular special lighting, orange underlighting, emissive upper lighting. I think something like this, positionally, is a good starting point. We just need to make some improvements on the material. I can complexify the lighting a little bit. I wonder though, what will happen if I put my fossil in here? That could either go well or not so well. Let me grab that. Okay, fossil blend test, copy. Here, I mean, this looks pretty nice, empty as it is. Let's paste, move it over to our location, move it down. Let's try and get the angle right because there's no bottom to it. Rotate, bring it down. Move it along slightly, maybe scale it up a bit. Let's just get it fit into position. Maybe I'll move the camera around. So obviously the color's a bit strong, so let's mellow that out. Maybe I'll do it a teeny bit blue. I'll grab the bottom color. Maybe that can stay as it is. Let's turn the strength down to make it a bit more moody. Let's volumize it a bit again. Let's change the material on the actual exhibition object a little bit. Maybe there's too much light going on in there now. Grab one of these old light objects, bring it down to the ground. Try and give our exhibit a little bit of lighting prowess, like this. So we get a little bit of underlighting there. Yeah, bring that down a bit. Resetting the rotation for that. Grabbing the end verts there. Let's bring them close to the border of the exhibit. Same thing with the others as well. RY90. So we're doing like a kind of light border on every corner of the exhibit there. See how that looks. Okay, not too bad. Call that low and assign that material to each of the low ones. Fine. Now that's done. Let me maybe orangify that one a little bit. Material up. So we're getting like a consistent mood with the background of the foreground. And where has our gradient gone for this top bar? That's fine. Let's turn that strength down a bit, and then let's make the actual exhibit section darker with a stronger roughness. And then from here, I quite like where we're going with it. Okay, we're not done yet. So bottom section, let's grab the lower faces again, bring them up a tiny bit, How does this look? Maybe the color is too strong there. Keep grabbing onto the wrong material for that. The Control Z is not working for that. Blender developers need to fix that on the emission value. Let's turn that down more. So let's go only to like 10 or something. So the square isn't producing much. That makes it more subtle. From here, do we have compositing active? Yes, on the camera. Let's just double check that. Yes, the bloom is active. We can control the strength from there. So a little bit of extra lighting. Okay. I kind of just locked in a little bit in the last, like, I don't know, 10 minutes or so. But I had to make some changes that would make it feel better. And now I think it does feel better. Feels a bit more realistic now. Still looks kind of cool frosting that up a little bit. So what we've ended up with is variable shaping on the lighting, variable color from below and above, some nice glass, a reflection, a cool backdrop, very geologic. Seems appropriate for like a fossil type object like this. So let's remove that again and bring the crystals back. From here, let's plug in the material and the roughness. So the material itself will need work. It's a bit of a mess how I've got the material set up at the moment. But I actually think the lighting setup is pretty good, all things considered. And again, we can always increase the emission output of like the upper objects. There we go, strengthening it a little bit. Some light casting through the crystalline. Let me try and get things in shape a bit more. Add a bit more light, give us a bit more power. Slight reduction on the volume maybe. Maybe I can separate the exhibit material. So we have material 1 and then we'll have another version. So I'll call that material box or material pad. And then we'll take the inner and outer sections of the bit just below the crystal. Then we're going to give that a darker material to the rest of the exhibition box. So assign that to material pad. Material pad should be very dark, whereas material should be lighter. So there we go. Just a tiny bit. And let's see what happens if we increase the lower color again, like the lighting coming from below. And finally, I'm going to add one more material to this base object for these reflective areas. Material dark, selecting the inner bits that's reflecting the emissive light on the inside. Assign that. Let's see, make it completely black. And full roughness, so now we can't actually see the orange light bouncing in the middle there, but we can still increase its strength. Alright, so we've ended up with something. It's been quite a long improv video. It's a starting point for an interesting exhibition style. Again, crystals, very difficult things to light, but they're ready. They're waiting for a better material. Then without them, it looks like this. And then of course I can throw in a fossil and it looks good in there as well. So I think a lot of objects would look great in this, with crystals probably being the most difficult thing to light out of anything. We have hidden lighting down below that can bounce upwards and provide some extra color light. Like you see that orange we've got going on there, that's being provided from below. I can actually change that to anything. See that? We can give it a blue tint or anything else. So I can zoom in a bit. You can kind of see how powerful that is. Change the tint to anything. I'll keep it on like a slight orange for now. And we have the context of this really cool geological background. So I think it's cool so far. I just need to do more experimenting with the crystal side. So if you made it this far through the video, put a diamond emoji in the comments so I can see if you made it this far. If you like my work, you can support me on Patreon. We have some experimental files on there. Otherwise, check out my tools at codesholt.online/store. And if you're new here, feel free to subscribe. Have a great day, and I will see you next time.